Good evening. Welcome to the Global Diversity Inclusion Employer Panel on our event this evening on diversity and inclusion in the workplace. This evening, our moderator will be Juan Carlos Matos, VP of Student Affairs for Diversity and Inclusion, Office of Multicultural Affairs. Our employer panelists are Ms. Crystal Hunt from Bloomberg, Shadae McDanie from All Star Project, Marlene Taylor from Primary Care Health Giver for Montefiore Hospital. I will be reading their bios so that you can all know who you have here addressing you as Fordham University students with the importance of diversity and inclusion in the workplace. Crystal Hunt, Diversity and Inclusion Recruiting, Bloomberg. Crystal Hunt is part of the diversity inclusion recruiting team at Bloomberg with a focus on entry-level talent. In this role, she helps to advance the organization's commitment to identify, attract, and recruit top entry-level diverse talent with a focus on historically underrepresented groups. She partners with campus recruiting and key business stakeholders to help achieve hiring goals. She also manages external partnerships as well as a number of internal diversity initiatives. Prior to joining Bloomberg, Crystal was the Vice President of Diversity and Recruiting at Citigroup, where she was responsible for the development and implementation of diversity strategies to attract and recruit top diverse talent for Citi's institutional clients group businesses. Crystal has over 15 years of HR experience working in various HR roles and functions at a variety of companies such as Citigroup, American Express, and JP Morgan. Shadae McDanie is city leader of the All Star Project, ASP of Newark. She oversees all of New Jersey All Stars free performance-based after-school youth and development program, including the All-Star Talent Show Network, the Development School for Youth, and All-Stars award-winning Operation Conversation, Cops and Kids. McDanie directs the ASP's nonprofit partnership and community building activities in New Jersey, is also a member of ASP's National Senior Leadership Team. Prior to ASP, McDanie worked for 15 years in the local, state, federal nonprofit sector, where she provided innovative community-based education to thousands of young people and their families in underdeserved communities. A dancer for most of her life, McDanie also co-founded a nonprofit mentoring program that uses the arts to help young people build self-esteem and community. McDanie earned a bachelor's degree in health sciences at Howard University, received her master's in social work from Rutgers University, listed as one of ROINJ 2019 Influencers, People of Color. McDanie was also named by Newark Venture Partners MVP as one of the 10 badass girl bosses of Brick City. Marlene Taylor is a primary care provider with over 27 years of experience working in the field of HIV and hepatitis disease. She is currently on the medical staff at Montefiore Medical Center in the Bronx, New York, where she was appointed in 2011 in the Department of Medicine as provider for over 300 patients. Her previous position as one of the top HIV providers in Harlem, New York, was a result of over a decade of treating patients affected with this epidemic at North General Hospital in Central Harlem, where she was on staff at the Special Services Clinic from the late 90s until the hospital closed in 2010. Her medical training began close to her home in the village of Harlem, where she graduated from Harlem's Hospital Physician Assistant Program in 1981. Prior to this, she completed her undergraduate degree in biology from Fordham University. She continued her education at Columbia University Post-Baccalaureate Program and NY Medical College Graduate Program in Cell Biology and Anatomy. She has practiced in several institutions in the New York City area, such as Beth Israel Medical Center, Mount Sinai Hospital, Lincoln, Lenox Hill Hospital, and St. Luke's Roosevelt. In 2004, she was recruited as a clinical scientist by the Virology Division of Abbott Laboratories, where she gained invaluable experience. However, returned to her passion of treating patients in undeserved communities. She resumed her practice on the medical staff at North General Hospital ID Clinic, where she treated over 200 patients, as well as ran the hepatitis C co-infection clinic. Her patients followed her to the Bronx, where she continues to manage them. Joining us this evening from the Office of Career Services is our Senior Associate Director, Sharita Robeson, our Senior Associate Director, Nicole Catafano. And with that, I turn it over to our VP of Multicultural Affairs and Student Affairs, Mr. Matos.
Hey everyone. So really excited to be facilitating this amazing panel. So we have 3 questions for the panelists. So if at any point anyone needs me to reread the question, just feel free to just mention that as folks kind of share a little bit about their perspectives with folks. So for the first question, can you tell us a brief description of your organization and what type of programming and initiatives you have in place that focus on diversity and inclusion to help ensure an equitable and inclusive environment? So anyone can jump in first.
So I guess, can you guys hear me? Okay.
Yep.
Okay, great. So I actually meant to send the most updated bio, which included my position at the Ryan Center, which is a federally qualified health center in Hell's Kitchen area of Manhattan. I had been on staff at Monty for 7 years and was offered a position as Assistant Director of HIV and Addiction Medicine, as well as treating primary care medical patients. What we have in place at Ryan is vastly different than was in place at Montefiore, personally and professionally in terms of what was offered. We currently have at the Ryan Center, and it is fairly new, and it was something that was put in place after May, after the George Floyd killing. And it is actually, we recruited a staff, various professionals throughout the organization. Ryan Clinic has several sites in New York, one in Hell's Kitchen, as I mentioned, where I practice, but also 2 in Harlem, one in the Lower East Side, and one on 97th Street in Amsterdam. And they recruited several staff members from each site. And they actually interviewed several, they call them consultants, to come up with a person who would be responsible for developing a diversity and inclusion program. And that just started over the last few weeks. And so that seems so far pretty promising. I am one of the ambassadors who helps to make sure that at our site, the ideas and the tools and the skills are continued, even after the, I believe it's going to be a 6-month process. Unlike Montefiore Medical Center, which as a huge teaching institution, you would think that there was something in place. And what I felt there compared to what I experienced at Ryan, just as an employee, is vastly different. I didn't feel as included and inclusive, and as the only African-American female in the Department of Medicine in infectious disease, I regularly felt when I was never really invited to the table of decision making, unlike that at Ryan, where I am on a administrative level, but also in a leadership role. So I feel that this is what should have been happening, years. But it feels nice to be part of something that is speaking to the change that's needed in healthcare. Because we know disparities exist. So, yeah.
Yeah, Marlene, I can jump in after you. I definitely can feel that same pain sometimes, always being the only female and always probably the only Black person in a room when you are looking to change the world. So a little bit about the All Stars. We're about a 40-year-old program or organization. We're privately funded, we're private nonprofit national organization. Our work really is to transform the lives of youth in poor communities using the developmental power of performance in partnership with caring adults. In short, our programs are bridge builders. We use performance and improv to help young people and business partners see each other in new ways. We look to really introduce young people to a more cosmopolitan world, and we work really with young people who are growing up in poor communities. We have a very interesting approach to diversity and inclusion because by essence, all of our work embodies diversity and inclusion just by nature of using development and using performance to help people build together and create together. So our performatory developmental approach is designed to bridge gaps between the white community and communities of color by creating performances and conversations to allow diverse people to come together. And with these performances and conversation, we learn from each other. White people can learn from Black people. They can better understand the experience of racism. It gives places and opportunities for everyone to address the impact of racial division. So really, in essence, what I see in my work every day is this amazing relationship building engine that really doesn't happen typically. It's very, I get to see and witness transformation just about every day when a kid from Newark is calling up a CEO from RBC to tell them about their day and what they're aspiring to do in college. It's quite fascinating to see how performance can change the world.
Am I supposed to jump in?
Yeah,
as well?
Krista, you can jump in. Yeah.
Sure. So as was mentioned, I work at Bloomberg LP, which is a fintech company, financial technical company, and our main product and how we make most of our money is through sales of the Bloomberg terminal, which a lot of students actually have access to on their campuses. And our product is widely used in the marketplace. Our clients are, bulge bracket banks, government institutions, and as I said, universities such as Fordham. And in my role, I sit on the D&I team, and we really, when we come into work every day, our goal is to make Bloomberg an inclusive environment, one that is diverse, make sure that people who are underrepresented have an environment where they can be successful. And so, a lot of my role specifically is focused on the attraction piece, the talent acquisition piece of seeking out diverse candidates to come and work at Bloomberg. But we also work on a lot of internal initiatives that help with the advancement, the acceleration of underrepresented groups and women within the organization.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Some of the reflections I have on the things that you all shared, and first of all, just thank you all for being so authentic, even from the first question. I definitely appreciate you all sharing that. I think the things that you all talked about in terms of being the only one that came up in a couple of folks' reflections, many students of color feel that at Fordham, right? Whether it's in their classes, whether it's in the other things that they're involved in. So I definitely think that reflection of, as unfortunate as it is, that might be an experience that might continue, right? Going into the workplace and how to kind of prepare yourself and reflect on that various fields are also dealing with systematic racism, oppression, and how to really work on undoing that. So I think that's really important because I know it may seem for some folks that, education is suffering from systematic racism and oppression, and that if you go into the workplace, into a different field, that it may be different, but, there's a lot of work to be done. So thank you all for sharing that. So one of the second questions here, so it's a two-part question. So could you share with students what inspired you to get involved with diversity and inclusion and in the importance it brings to the workplace? But also, what are some factors they should consider relative to a company's ethnic diversity initiatives?
Mm. I think it's almost connected to what you just pointed out. I mean, part of what inspires me is really connected to the fact that being a person in my role, I am constantly working with affluent white men, because that's really where and who dominates corporate world. And what I do every day is get to advocate for, support, and demand access for our young people who are growing up, our Black and brown kids who are growing up in poor communities. So in a way, being one of those kids myself, growing up, and I went to a all Black college. I married a Black man. Like I experience racism every day, whether it's in your face or it's subdued. I worry about my husband being out at night in a car, and is he going to come home? Like this is just like an endurance that we have been conditioned to work with and live with. And in my career and in this role, I get to take all of that, take all of my experiences and still build, and still get to walk into a room with the whole community on my back, with knowing John's story and Tim's story and that young person, and understanding our founders of the organization and what they had to go through to make sure that change comes. I really do recognize that the work I'm doing is culture change. So it's not really just addressing diversity and inclusion, and I'm not saying that's anything to take away from it. It's a very important context, but on a larger scale, the whole culture of racism has to be eradicated and abandoned and changed, so that way diversity and inclusion is not something we strive for. It's something that is like, it's normal, it's what it is. And every day I get inspired by creating environments where people feel a sense of belonging and feel a sense of intimacy with people they would have never met otherwise. So it's very inspiring for me in that way.
Thank you, Shadae. Crystal or Marlene?
Yeah, so, pretty much historically, health disparities have existed in medicine throughout the country, but of course, as well as the world. And what inspired me, in addition to the already documented disparities around heart disease, diabetes, cancers, several other diseases. When I was at Fordham and decided to go into medicine, another, being the only African-American female biology major in my class, was something that continued to bother me. I'm like, we know that these issues exist in healthcare, but why aren't there more men and women of color going into medicine? But again, that was 1979, and there were different diseases. HIV wasn't even a documented disease then. I remember at the time it was heart disease, teen pregnancy. Those are the things that stood out. And wanting to be the generation to address treating those diseases and more around prevention. So from nutrition to the actual predisposition to these chronic illnesses that lead to the things that continue to kill Black and brown people, like strokes and heart attacks. And fast forward to from 79 to the mid 80s, I saw the beginning of HIV when it was continuing to affect our community, and still does. So that became my focus when around education, we did not think we were at risk. So our numbers continued to increase to the 90s, and even now, young men who have sex with men of color are 1/2 times more likely to be HIV infected compared to their white counterparts. And a lot of that had to do with, or has to do with, so many factors that impact our wellness in general. education, health literacy, access to care. There's so many factors that continue to be challenges in healthcare. And so when we did have our first diversity and inclusion, and they actually added on belonging session, to hear the numbers around healthcare disparities and why they exist. 40 years after graduating from Fordham, it was like the same story, but different diseases, and hoping that not only systematically where there is institutionalized racism that exists, so there's the two stories. There's what's happening in healthcare with people of color, and then there's what are the things that are preventing us from addressing these, well into 4 decades. And every year, year, there's a new hot topic around healthcare. But why do we continue to have numbers that when you compare them to Caucasians, we still are in the same place? It's the same diseases, and different, some of them are the same diseases. So we still die from heart disease at higher rates than Caucasians. We still die from cancers. And then the new diseases, of course, COVID-19, that's, pretty much highlights what we already knew in the healthcare field. And for those of us who work in communities of color, continue to see the fact that our people still show up in emergency rooms using those as their primary care setting. So we show up late historically, and I can go on, and I can choose a disease randomly and tell you the story of that in medicine and what I've experienced. And so those are the things that inspire me and continue to allow me to go into work every day at 62 years old, where most people are thinking about retiring in a few years. I do not see a light at the end of the tunnel until, one of the things that Ryan gave me was a position in a leadership role as the assistant director of HIV and the assistant director of addiction medicine, and being able to sit at the table where decisions are made at this federally qualified health center, where I feel like I do have a voice. And that was something I never felt at Montefiore in those 7 years, or Beth Israel, where they were usually a white male director of the department, who, even though on paper to get all the grants and all the funding to treat these patients, they didn't care. They didn't care because they did not have people of color sitting there telling them what the issues were. It was all about their insurance, and I can go on, but I'm inspired every single day by my patients who continue to deal with these diseases, and by my community. And, the very first person, my mom, who had heart disease and diabetes, and sitting in the emergency room at Harlem Hospital back in the 70s, and not seeing people that look like us to treat us. So, I'm getting chills as I'm talking, but, it's healthcare is, we have a lot of work still to do.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Marlene, for sharing. Crystal.
Sure. For me, I became really passionate about diversity when I took my first role back in 2006. And it was largely driven by, as was mentioned, always being I've spent my entire career in financial services. And so I'm very used to being the only, suffering from imposter syndrome, all of the things that we that we deal with. And so when I started in diversity recruiting, there was just this passion around being able to help people that looked like me get jobs that would really change the trajectory, not only for them, but their family as well. And, I've had many students say that to me, that, you're helping me to create wealth for generations in my family. So that is really what, drove my passion was, and also changing the demographics within those organizations, right? Helping to make sure that, we're creating an environment that is diverse, quite frankly. And there's still a long way to go in financial services. But, just knowing that I've played a small part in changing the lives of Black and Brown people really motivates me every day to continue the work that I'm doing. So like I said, I love what I do. I've been doing it for many years, and I find it so satisfying when, I get invited to a graduation or someone sends me a note just saying, thank you, thank you, thank you, because you literally have changed, helped change the life of not just me, but my family as well.
Here, here. Mr. Matos, Marlene and Crystal reminded me of some of the things that we might want to share with our students in regards to what they can look at or look for in an organization when they're thinking about working for a company or starting their own business. Even though I'm not necessarily an employer, I work with a lot of employers. And one of the beautiful thing about our partners, at least, ones that come to my mind right away, is the fact there's a lot of people, even in the affluent community, who are interested in doing something, learning how to fix this problem, or they really are vested in trying to be the change, but they don't necessarily know how. A lot of my partners come to the All-Stars and say, hey, listen, there's some major issue we got going on in the world with social justice and diversity and inclusion, and we don't know what to do. And they're admitting that they don't know what to do. And they're like, can you help us? And there's something about that for me, again, that's inspiring. It kind of goes back to that same question you asked earlier, which is, I get to be a builder. I get to be a bridge builder. I get to bring people who wouldn't have had access into these affluent communities, but these leaders and CEOs who are leading the charge and are open to the community and open to being told they don't know what they're doing, or open to the fact that they can be uncertain about something and not have to know the answer. I think that's a beautiful organization to impact, to consider working for, to go into an organization and feel like you can have an impact on the direction in which they go. So I get to really just uplift. People are coming to my mind right now. There's a huge real estate developer in Newark who is so serious about the renaissance of Newark. And Newark is a mostly Black and Brown community. And he's like, Shadae, I'm not trying to come in here and do a bunch of stuff that the community can't be a part of. I need your help. I want to make sure that our kids, the Newark kids, are part of this renaissance and they can participate in it in an active way. Shadae, what can we do? I'm like, that's an employer you want to work for. So anyway.
I agree. If I could just jump in, I think that's a really good point. I believe that students, they should, when they're considering organizations, they should think about what the actions are that a company is taking as they relate to diversity initiatives. And so, think about, are there good faith efforts in place that are helping to ensure, women and people of color can be successful? When they look around the organization, do they see people that look like them? Do they have programming that focuses on issues of diversity and inclusion? What systems are in place to remove, at least to the extent possible, as much bias from hiring and promotion practices, for instance. So, I always tell students, for a lot of companies, this continues to be a work in progress, and it is going to take some time, but look at what the company is actually doing to try to move the needle in these areas, because each company has to look internally to identify where their gaps are and then take active measures to make improvements.
Yes. So, of course, in medicine, we have these preconceived notions around people of color and how they behave and how they take care of their health care. Usually there this hierarchy in medicine where there's an attending physician, there are the residents, and then there are the medical students. So what usually happens is to kind of like brown nose the attending and get points and maybe become a chief resident, you take on their view around how a certain patient behaves. So there's the medical, there's the facts, and then there's this sort of like an attitude towards certain patient types. And unfortunately, that continues to happen. For example, there was this book, The House of God, that was out in the 70s, and it was kind of a story around an intern and his experience in medicine. And they would call certain patient types who came to the emergency room. They were like horrible names now that I think back. Gomer, which stands for get out of my emergency room. And that stood for like the alcoholic patient who kept coming in and, in the story, wasting the time because he would never get help. So this happens in medicine. And if it doesn't happen from the top down, then you continue to get these interns and residents who are just taking on the attitude of some, for the most part, an older white man who does not have experience in communities of color, in hospitals or doesn't have a background, even if they work in these hospitals. So I've seen over the years, people who practice at Lenox Hill, people who practice at Columbia, Beth Israel, who have never dealt with a Black person or a Latino person outside of their patients that they see in the ER or the hospital. So even though they don't say it, they take on this attitude. And so when you're on rounds and you might feel something, people don't always say what they feel. So many experiences and stories I could tell you from over the years, but just one, the on-call room at Beth Israel, the housekeeping staff was, Latino and African-American for the most part. And we're on rounds, and a young Latina woman who just cleaned the bed where we slept walked by and had to say, excuse me, and we're just going over these cases. But I said, oh, hi, what her name, whatever her name was, Maria, and they looked at me, the rest of the team, as though like, why are you even speaking to her? Like, that's just one example of things that happen, microaggressions, I don't know what to call them, but there's sort of like this hierarchy that interns, medical students are afraid to speak up and say something, but I felt comfortable enough to do it then. And as I have a program that I started through my church around students who want to go into medicine. And I try to incorporate that. Some of them shadow me at the clinic or the hospital, and I allow them to see that there are examples where you still need to show up if you're a person of color and speak up and not feel uncomfortable, because when they get on rounds, when they get in the hospital and rotate, those opportunities to really make a difference and make a patient feel more comfortable, it's just something that students don't feel comfortable with. So I try to do that with every student who shadows me and spends times with me and wants a letter of recommendation, that it's not just about getting in, but what you do once you get in and how you make a difference, not only to your patients, but show your colleagues, because they have no clue still, decades later, those who really don't appreciate not only the patient's history, but the diseases and how it impacts the patient's lives.
Definitely.
So, yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate all you all talking about, again, having an opportunity to have a voice at the table, right? Maybe for the first time in different settings, but really being able to center and channel voices of communities of color, right? In ways that you all bring your own histories into that, but also the idea of like a greater sense of purpose, which I know like in a lot of research that I've done, trying to explore differences as to why people of color choose to go into student affairs in particular, as an example, that's a dimension that exists for many people of color that's different than white folk, right? Like there's sometimes another sense of purpose to support folks. So I appreciate you all sharing a lot of those perspectives. So this next question really gets us, and we've been talking a little bit about racism and sort of like what the country looks like now, but diving a little bit deeper into that. So in light of the current social climate we're living in now, how has your organization responded? And what type of advice would you like to share to students as they move forward into their career paths in work? And Shadae, I know you kind of touched a little bit about that already, so you were kind of like channeling that question,
Yeah.
but we'll kind of dive deeper into that now.
No, that's really helpful. I mean, the All-Stars has been more even recently now called into boardrooms and called into, corporate environments and asked the question on, hey, how can we enhance our DEI principles? And basically our response to that is DEI is great, but if you don't have the conditions or the environment to create a space where people can have hard conversations and get more intimate and learn about each other's experiences, the DEI falls short and it becomes just tactics. So what we've been able to do and what we've started really, I guess, advertising, because we've been doing this actually for almost 50 years, but it just seems very important to people now. What we've been looking at is helping companies create a culture where they can be together, come together, and see each other in new ways through performance and improv. And it's really awkward to say sometimes in these environments because they're like, we're corporate companies and you're talking about play and pretend. Like, what the heck is that? But the fun part is that improv, its tool is about building. Improv is really a yes and move. It's really saying, how can I see problems and issues as offers and build on them? And performance is this really amazing developmental approach that allows people to be who they are and who they're becoming at the same time. They can perform in new ways. They don't have to use the same rhetoric and the same scripts that they've been given. They can change the narrative right now. So we try those things, we test those things, we put those things on for corporations and our young people in all of our programs, which we talked about earlier in the bio. They get to try on these new performances too. So a part of what we do with our kids is we take them in and out of Newark and out of their communities into these big, tall skyscrapers, and they meet these new people. And of course, they're like, what the heck am I doing here? How did I get here? How do I have a conversation with so-and-so that I never met who, makes more money than my entire family's made in 3 generations? And really what we're saying is perform before you even know how to. Pretend that you know what to say and that you know how to be, but we're also giving young people scripts and narratives, and we're giving them this great base of support and play that they can make mistakes, they can say the wrong things, and we're going to support you through that, and have adults do that work with our kids. So the adults in the program are just as eager to learn and eager to grow alongside our kids because they're developing too. Development's a two-way street. It's not just for kids. It's not just for Black people. It really is everybody. In order to really impact racism in our country, everybody has to develop. We have to create something entirely new. And that's what I would give to our young people, the students that are moving forward in their careers, is really thinking about the fact that leading the world or being a leader means that you got to be a leader for all people. You got to be able to sit across the table from somebody that disagrees with you. You got to sit across the table from somebody that doesn't look like you, and be able to build and create something new. The world is dying for new solutions. We can't keep throwing like old techniques and antiquated ideas at this huge beast that is America. So I would definitely share with our young people or the students that are going through, this program is consider performance. I know it sounds crazy sometimes, but consider improv in all these spaces. Think of your situations as scenes and plays, and that, who's your scene partner? Whose play is this anyway? Don't be in somebody else's play. You're in your play, you're the director of your play, and you can pick your scene partners and your support. And when you go into these rooms that are unfamiliar and you're uncomfortable, really think about that your role is to build. Your role is to figure out how to create something with what somebody gives you. And that would really take people extremely far in any environment, not just your work environment, but in any environment.
Thank
Shadae, I wish Ryan had you as one of the consultants for our program because it sounds exciting.
Yeah, thank you.
I just wanted to go into
Call me
action.
up.
Who knows? We'll definitely exchange information later. But so again, in medicine, I know that what's taught alongside pharmacology and anatomy and cell bio is not the history of people of color in this country, particularly around African American and healthcare. So without knowing that, just with everything that needs to be addressed, if the history and the background is not there as the foundation, you can learn all the facts, all the diagnosis and treatment. But if you don't know the history of people of color, again, particularly African Americans, I don't think you can be a really good provider for that patient. The Tuskegee experiment and so many other things that happen to people of color in this country are things that impact how they behave when they come to a doctor's appointment. So when we hear that, no, I don't want the flu vaccine, as I continue to hear now that we have the flu vaccine is out and at least half of my Black patients don't want it. The time that I spend explaining to them and talking to them about what the flu vaccine is and why they need it more than ever takes time. But I think that most, Caucasian providers don't do that. They just don't take the time that's needed to know that, giving them examples of how my father never wanted to go to the doctor and actually died of complications of a stroke. Because he never wanted to go. And then I found this program at Sinai where the doctor goes to your house and he finally agreed to somewhat of an exam, but not a complete exam. But that took years of him really trying to deal with what was going on with his blood pressure. It didn't matter, even that his daughter is one of the top infectious disease specialists in New York. He called me once, and I'll give this example. This was about 10 years before he passed away, but he was admitted with acute renal failure. So that can happen from complications of high blood pressure or diabetes, or it can happen from prostate disease, which I know he had, but never dealt with. So he's admitted with acute renal failure, which basically means you don't pee, you can't go to the bathroom because the prostate got so enlarged and it backed up and caused problems with his kidney. So he was admitted, they treated it with fluids, decreased the inflammation, and they wanted to do a workup to look at underlying disease, like what's going on with your prostate that it enlarged like this. He was refused. Nobody's doing anything. Nobody's putting a tube up my whatever. So he's like, call my daughter. So I get a call and I'm like, okay, dad's going to finally get a workup. As soon as I got there, this hospital in Brooklyn, I think it was Methodist. So the white male doctor standing in the room with their lab coats around dad. And he's like, there she is, there's my daughter. So I'm ready to have the conversation to help him understand that he needed a workup. And the first thing he said to me is, okay, get my clothes out of the closet. I'm getting out of here. Like he still saw me as a daughter and he didn't want to go there. And, it just speaks to like the fear, the miseducation, like the things that have happened for decades with our people. People don't always take the time out. Some do. In Harlem Hospital, I have to say, where I did some of my training, amazing. We had like a core group in the 70s who were amazing. Over time, I don't know if that's continued to happen, where you really take the time to really not only educate patients over time, but to really have them make decisions around preventing disease. So the history and the foundation around education is important. But also the way patients behave when they come into the exam room, I see evidence of white privilege. I see Blacks being fearful and Latinos sometimes just, and this is a generalization, of course, but I have to say the majority of each of these groups, this is what I see. So I work in the area of Hell's Kitchen where there's a and I treat infectious disease. So I see the majority of white gay men who are coming in for PrEP, which prevents HIV. And the attitude and the white privilege sometimes, I'm not saying again that it's all of them, but it's just so clear that like, and then I'll have a patient from Africa who comes in the room, they sit on the table, they don't talk, they lift up their shirt before I even talk to them. And it's just like, wait, let's sit down and talk about what's going on. Like it's this instant thing that they do. I see it. I just see so many cultural barriers to adequate healthcare that if the healthcare providers don't understand what goes into these patients' lives before they even come to the doctor, things are going to continue to be the way they are. So it's nice to see that, again, at Ryan, we've established this cultural and diversity inclusion department, or a cultural, who do they call? They call her actually a consultant. But what they also do is when we have our monthly meetings, we'll have an opportunity to educate the staff about whatever's going on. For example, Juneteenth, they asked me to do a little historical blurb on Juneteenth. Now, are people going to remember that next June 17th? I don't think so. Maybe some of them, but a lot of them just were not aware of why we celebrated this phenomenal, important date. A lot of just regular everyday staff, no idea. So there are things in place that are trying to address it, but I did notice when I was doing my research around Juneteenth, when I would look at all the big corporations, and Crystal and, Shadae, I'm sure you could relate to this, like these big companies have these statements on their websites that say, we don't agree with, and it was all after George Floyd. Did they have that before? Did Ryan have this statement when you go to the website before that says we, are going to acknowledge people of color and we don't stand for racial, racism? It's all these beautifully written statements, but what's actually going to happen when you go back to the day-to-day activities within the corporation or within the clinic? So I'm hopeful that Ryan will try to make some changes, not only for educating the staff, but also in the way that the staff treat patients, so that there's these preconceived notions that maybe they were not aware of themselves. And hopefully, over time, other hospitals and clinics will incorporate those type of tools for change.
Thank you, Marlene.
Mhm.
And I can talk a little bit about, our response, and I'll approach it from two standpoints. One, internally and externally. Internally, my team, like I said, I sit on the D&I team, and we really stepped up to help create an environment where employees can discuss these issues openly and really work to create a safe space. So one of the things that we started doing is hosting D&I office hours. We also trained our managers on how to have constructive conversations, and again, provide safe spaces for people to be honest about how they were feeling. We started hosting conversations on race, which we have published on our blog in case anyone wants to view them. At Bloomberg, we have what we call communities, and their employee resource groups, and they have also really stepped up and, are hosting events where they highlight these issues, and, others, such as how COVID-19 is impacting the Black community. So the company, that's the internal piece. And then I'll say externally, and I just always assume that people know that Bloomberg, the company, is owned by Mike Bloomberg, the former mayor of New York City and the man who ran for president. But I actually meet a lot of people who never make that connection. So I just want to say that because a lot of people don't know that over 80% of our company's profits go to philanthropy, which include causes related to social justice. So, earlier this year, one of the initiatives that Mike Bloomberg announced was the Greenwood Initiative, which is a plan to accelerate the pace of wealth accumulation for Black individuals and families. and just, really address the decades and centuries of underinvestment in our communities. Um, so, under this plan, the goal really is to create tens of thousands of minority-owned businesses and increase Black home ownership by 1 million. And then after the recent killings of, George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and others, unfortunately, one of the things that he did was increased his donation to social justice organizations like My Brother's Keeper Alliance, which was founded by President Obama. And then just last month, in September, he announced a $100 million donation to 4 historically Black medical schools. And again, we've been talking a lot about healthcare and medicine. And the reason that he did that is because if we really want to, change how communities of color have access to healthcare and the quality of the care they get, let's start by making it creating more Black doctors. And so he gave $100 million to the 4 historically Black medical schools that we have in this country. And so through our philanthropy group, we work very closely with cities and mayors across the country to help build stronger and healthier communities. So we've had the internal response by ensuring that our employees, have the tools that they need to cope, whether it's additional mental health resources or, whatever that is, but also from a philanthropic perspective to make sure that our communities are better places.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. I'll share a couple reflections that really stuck out to me. So definitely in terms of building through performance and using your own script, I think that resonated a lot. And I think that even ties back to imposter syndrome in some ways, because the idea of feeling like an imposter is that, well, everyone else has the script and I don't. Everyone else knows what's going on and I don't, right? So I think that's really important. I definitely resonate, again, with the idea of healthcare aversion, right? Due to the history of mistreatment and the way that many people, unless you yourself are doing research and you have to, take those like IRB thing, take an IRB test and go through that usually that webinar that talks about it, the Tuskegee Airmen. I also think about tests that were done in Puerto Rico, non-consensual sterilization of women in Puerto Rico too, right? So there's all these different, this long history of Black and brown bodies not being valued through medicine, and folks not being able to understand that in the presence of Marlene. Thank you so much for bringing that into the space today, because a lot of folks, again, don't recognize, right, that it's not just that people of color are like, well, I don't want to go to the doctor just because, right? Like there's all this like historical trauma connected to that. And then Crystal, again, thank you in terms of really tackling and sharing internal and external changes to combat racism and oppression. And I think it really goes hand in hand. So there's one more question that I have here that, given our time, I want to share this question, and then it gives us time to kind of, for folks to add any additional thoughts, reflections, words of wisdom. So this question is, what's been the most challenging part of this work, and what's been the most rewarding part of this work?
Oh, I don't know if we got time for that now.
That's why I left it for last. That's the last question.
God. Listen, I mean, the work that we do is challenging every day. The women on this call today, which I'm just so esteemed to be partnering with them, is we set out to change the world every day. There's a decision that we get up in the morning and we say, all right, what can I do to change the world? And because of that we carry that weight. But I think during the crisis, you also start to see how much we're frontliners in a lot of different ways. I mean, Marlene is like legitimately a frontliner. And we, also work in spaces where we're working with people who need support, who feel disconnected, who feel isolated on a daily basis, and then even more now. So what's been really challenging, or the biggest challenge for me in this work, is having those stories or hearing those stories of young people who are desperately trying to hang in there and to, you know, see opportunities and still act on them. I have a young person that went through our program this summer, and we offer internships at these companies I'm telling you guys about, right? And we went to offer a young person an internship, and he said, I am so enthusiastic about joining and having this internship experience because I learned so much through the program. But because of COVID, I'm the only person in my family that still has a job, and it's a low paying job, but it's a job that has healthcare benefits. So I have to turn down probably an opportunity that would have changed the trajectory of his life and his family's life. So that way he can take care of his family on minimum wage, because healthcare is essential right now. It's essential for communities of color. So that was hard for me to hear. And it even shakes me up even right now when I know how eager and how much our students worked for these opportunities and how we supported them to see that they have what it takes to even act on them. That's the big stuff, is that our kids can even see that there's a lot of opportunities around them, but if they don't feel supported and if they don't feel like they have the access, then what good is just seeing the opportunity if you can't act on it? So here he was saying, I see it and I appreciate it, and I still can't act on it because I am held back by what I think Marlene and Crystal are saying so well. It's just the institutionalized systemic racism that is in our communities that comes out, and it looks like this. It looks like him saying, I can't act on it because I have to take care of my family. But what's been really, I think, hopeful is that I've been a part of creating hope. I've been a part of a community that really has found ways to innovate and pivot and evolve our way of thinking, evolve what partnerships look like and collaborations looks like. I've been most excited about the diversity of people who have said, I want to do something different. I want to do more than write a statement, which is like what we're talking about. I want to do more. I've had people who said, hey, listen, I'm one of those CEOs that threw something up on my website, and that's not enough. I need to do some drastic intentional change, and that they have decided to do that alongside Black leaders, alongside Black and brown kids. I have been deeply moved by our community in ways in which that make me feel there is hope in the world, and that we actually can come to a place where people see each other in new ways and work with each other and can be closer and more intimate in their experiences. So the crisis has done something very, I think, radical in that respect, and that we can see that there's solutions that can be created today.
Great. So yeah, powerful stuff. And having a son who's a student at Howard now, Shadae, he's the undergrad is virtual, right? So he attended actually last year's, thanks to Maria for inviting him, last year's Global Diversity. And he's, even though he didn't go to Fordham before he transferred to Howard, he's like a family member between a professor at Fordham, Dr. Mark Nason, who invited him to sit in his hip hop class, and also, you know, ongoing cultural activities at Fordham. But, you know, it's definitely a time where creative ways to empower our students and sons and daughters and nieces and nephews. And for me, it's not only my sons, but my patients. The challenges I see are, you know, just continuing on a day-to-day basis to empower them to be advocates for themselves when they leave my office, but go to specialist office where they may be afraid to speak up and to say why they're there. We see, you know, in the clinics, there's this big charts or medical records and some random intern or resident who's never seen them before. But again, it's that typical white male with the jacket on, and it's this fear of like, they don't speak up. And I've heard so many stories over the years where I'm like, well, what did they say? I don't have the discharge summary. Well, they just said they didn't find anything. So teaching my patients to be advocates for themselves, time constraints is definitely a challenge. Over the years, healthcare has become, we have medical records, so we've had less and less time to spend with patients. They only give us 20 minutes. So during that time to make a diagnosis, send the prescription electronically, examine them, that's ridiculous. So time is definitely a factor that I struggle with. So much so that I wind up having like notes to do days, weeks later, just because they just have to bill later, because I don't look at the clock when my patients are in the room. I make sure they get whatever time they need. And if it takes 45 minutes, then that's what it takes. So that when they leave, they feel like they left with something, and they feel comfortable with whatever the diagnosis is. There are various organizations which are, have come about in the last few years. Even pre-COVID, White Coats for Black Lives. The National Medical Association has a division that deals with issues around disparities and comorbidities in the African American community, and so many other organizations that really try to teach medical students on a level before they even get into practice about the importance of addressing health disparities, not the diseases themselves. Those are easy. We can pick up Harrison's and find out how to treat A, B, C, and D. It's that underlying stuff and the foundation that really goes into why we continue to have these health disparities. COVID has given us so many opportunities to be creative in how we practice. So we have telemedicine visits where I see my patients virtually, and sometimes, again, we take longer to go over things, and sometimes it's quicker. But what I do find is that I'm able to reach patients who may be afraid to come into the office. There's so much that goes into, for example, a patient with an STD or who's HIV positive but never went into treatment because they're afraid of who they may see. They've heard stories about the medication, quote unquote, killing them. So many other issues that go into why we don't show up for primary care and why we wind up in the emergency room when things have already gotten out of control, and then we all are admitted, and family members are there and worried about things. But had those diseases been dealt with on a primary care basis, they wouldn't show up and be, the highest level of patients who are dying from heart disease and strokes and even AIDS these days. So I find that I can even have a conversation with patients before they even come to the clinic and kind of develop trust is key. You have to feel comfortable trusting your healthcare provider with telling them the truth. Even a patient I had today who I have something called a scribe. So it's a person who takes the notes and writes down the findings so I could sit there with the patient. So the scribe was in the room and the nurse was in the room and he was chit-chatting, but then when he had to stand in the hall and wait for something, he asked me to come over, and he admitted that he had like burning when he urinated and he had had unprotected sex. And so, then I could tell the nurse to give him the blah, blah, blah. But all I'm saying is trust and feeling safe is important for our patients. And the telehealth visits have allowed us to see patients differently. And even though the vast majority of them want to hurry up and get back to the clinic, this new COVID time has created a way where they can call me, not only between 9 and 5, but sometimes on the weekends. And if something comes up, I can document it. The clinic can bill for it, but also patients sometimes feel more comfortable talking over the phone. So, or than coming in the clinic. And a lot of them are just afraid to, of course, possibly be exposed if they're in a setting, even though what Ryan has in place are these partitions and your temperature is taken when you come in. So we try to still, adhere to social distancing and monitoring patients when they come in. And if they do have symptoms, they're immediately put in isolation, and then we go in with the protective gear. So I know it was a lot, but did I answer the question?
Yeah, definitely. Thank
Okay.
you. All powerful stuff.
And I think for me, I think everyone in diversity feels this way, is that the biggest challenge is really changing a mindset and, convincing people that systemic racism is a real thing and it transcends all facets of life. It's, I've, like I said, spent my entire career in corporate America and financial services, which is still dominated, white male dominated as an industry. But we talk about the healthcare field. We talk about going to buy a home, right? It's systemic and it crosses over into all facets of life. And so the biggest challenge that I find is just changing a mindset and trying to get people to understand, that it's real and how it plays out in these different areas of our lives. And so whether it's, within corporate America, whether it's in healthcare, it is a real thing. And so for me, that's really difficult because, you see it, you see the inequities, you see, how candidate is great and the terms that are, the codes when you're talking about a person of color, right? Um, and so that's definitely a challenge because you feel like you have to constantly educate and just try to tear down these things brick by brick. But the flip side of that, the rewarding side is that you do start to see those little wins. And I talked before about it's not something that is going to happen overnight. That these issues are centuries old. And so we can't expect that, just with the flip of a switch, all these, these mindsets are going to go away. They are not. But, the more we continue to do what we do, we see a shift, right? And no change has come about without a struggle. So, I think, for me, it's seeing those wins that and that build upon the next one and the next one, and that's really what keeps me engaged and keeps me going.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. So again, looking at time. So I know usually when folks close out panels, they always ask sort of like a cheesy question. But I figured I'll ask this cheesy question. So because I think it does twofold. So if you were to take yourself back to being a senior in college, right, about to graduate, fall semester, thinking about prospects of what's next, what advice would you give yourself? And then, in turn, I guess that's giving the advice to students. What advice would you give yourself jumping into the workplace? Again, maybe not for the first time, but we're jumping into the workplace as a college graduate.
I think for me, I can start. I think for me, it's being more confident and really, feeling like I belong there. We've talked about being the only, we've talked about imposter syndrome. So, really feeling like I'm as good as the next person, and having that confidence because I think earlier on, you know, you don't feel as prepared or I didn't come from a wealthy background by any means, and so I always had to um apply myself a little harder, I felt. And even given my major, I studied biology in college and never never did anything with it. I ended up going into financial services, which meant for me that I was at a disadvantage because I didn't speak the lingo. I didn't know what these terms meant. And so I really had to work even harder to what I felt prove myself. So I would just say, know that you're good enough and, whatever you decide to do, you can. So for me, that would have been, coming out of, senior year, that would have been what I would have wished for.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Crystal.
Crystal, I think I'm on the same page or aligned with you. I mean, I remember getting out of college and being so hyped about what I know now to be a very low paying job, like completely settling. And I think what happens was, or what happens for young people that I think grow up in limited resource arenas or spaces or areas is we grew up feeling so grateful. Like my parents are West Indian. I'm first generation American. Like we don't complain about stuff. We are grateful for whatever you get. We don't, tell our moms we wish we had new kicks every year. Like that's not what we're talking about. It's literally be grateful for what you got. And I think that I took that too far, to the point where I was just so happy. I felt like everything was just enough. I just needed enough. I don't got to be negotiating, or I don't have to be thinking about how can I get more from. I literally was like, oh, you're going to offer me a job? Well, great. Like just not even thinking about the fact that there might even be more out there for me, or that there's more for me to ask for, or that I can make demands, or that I'm worth it, or, how to be bold. Being bold to me growing up was you being rude and being ungrateful. So I would say senior year of me, when I got so hyped about my first job in the field, and knowing in the back of my head, it's going to be hard for me to live off of that salary, but taking it anyway and just like charging it to the game. Like I got an opportunity. I did my best, and I can't ask them for anything else. And I shouldn't expect anything else, because expecting anything else means I'm ungrateful for the opportunity. So I think it's not settling, and knowing that you are enough and that there is more out there, and somebody else is going to ask for it if you don't.
Awesome. Just a quick thing before Marlene jumps in, that resonates in the sense that, right, like that goes back to the script. You know what I mean? Like our white counterparts in many ways, they know the script.
They know.
They went into it already knowing that I don't care what even if they don't get it, they still go into it asking, even if they're not going to get it, right? So I think that goes back to, we as folks that grow up with less means. I'm Dominican. I was born Dominican Republic, grew up in New York, but right, in similar ways, right, from Caribbean folk, right, that idea of we don't have the script, and many folks don't have that script to know these things. So that resonated with me very deeply. Thank you, Marlene. Some words of wisdom.
So going back to something my mom always told me, which I didn't always get, because, you're quiet and, somehow, and growing up with a Catholic school background, it's like quiet, that's how you behave. And also just being really shy, and actually stuttered as a child. So I didn't really speak much because I was worried about the stuttering, but also just not feeling comfortable and not feeling confident enough until I found what I was passionate about. And then fast forward to, being in a specialty where, I feel, relatively seasoned, and was asked to be a speaker for various pharmaceutical companies, and just being super confident at this point in my career. But, on one hand, it's like, how can you have that confidence when you don't have the experience to go along with it? But if I had to go back to college days, like I just remember the majority, and I hate to keep saying this, but it's the white male in the chemistry lab. I can think of it like it was yesterday. And general chemistry, the lab, there's these hoods, and you're doing the experiments, and just the pushiness and it was just this attitude. And I'm there, and I just would let them. And I wish I would have been more confident to say, excuse me, this is my vial or my flask or whatever. But there was just this attitude, and it was sort of like, okay, and sort of understood that there were some students who challenged the professor and just were at the front of the class. It's just certain things that I never spoke up about or never felt comfortable with, and probably mixed reasons. One, I was shy, but then on the other hand, it's like you're in these, Mulcahy Hall at Fordham, the chemistry classroom. It's this huge, and I could count how many students of color, but it just sort of like your place. And my dad used to make a joke about this, but my mother couldn't stand for it. It wasn't, when I think about it, it wasn't funny, but he would kind of make light of it. He was from the South. So he would say things like, we know our place, right? And make a joke about it. My mother's like, no. And she was the one who instilled, like, holding your head up and speaking up. And he would make fun of how probably we were in certain places and just kind of like would take things and not speak up. So I wish, of course, that I spoke up more. I wish I was more confident, and, just challenge things that I felt were probably unfair, but we just kind of accepted them at the time. And yeah, so that's what I just wish that confidence was there.
I think that goes back to generational trauma, right? Like that keeping your head down sometimes was survival in lots of different ways. So thank you, the three. Woo, y'all got me feeling great. So I appreciate everything the three of you all shared. So Maria, I don't know if you have any just closing thoughts or reflections for this amazing panel. Thank you all for all of your words of wisdom, sharing your experiences, and being vulnerable in this space for students. So I definitely appreciate that. So I'll turn it over to Maria to close us out.
Thanks so
This
much.
was absolutely phenomenal. Thank you. Thank you. I'm not even calling you my ladies. I'm calling you my queens. What you just left tonight for the students to hear when they log in is so valuable. And Marlene, I resonate with you so much because we both went to the same Catholic school and the same graduating class.
Yeah.
And I remember my first job after my mother died when I was 16. I had to start working right away. And my first job was Bellevue Hospital, pediatrics, a medical clerk. And that I survived there for 4 years was a miracle. And I resonate so much with what you said about the disconnect of the cultural norms, because there would be times when I would be helping a pediatric doctor with a file, but if they were walking with a group of other colleagues, and I would walk by and say hello to them, they would ignore me because I was this brown black clerk. And I see it in education. It's that I can go off on that about higher ed, but I'm not. This is my last global diversity inclusion program for this institution. And I remember in the beginning when I started trying to convince people that we needed to have diversity programming coming out of our office. And it would be like, really? Why do we need diversity programming? Why do we need a conference? And we had to keep it on it all the time. But there is one thing I do want to ask of the three of you, if you can, very shortly. I'm a big believer in hope and leaving a positive message, because we're dealing with a generation that just truly does not know what direction they're going in with what's happening. So if all of you could just take one moment and leave one positive message about challenge, but facing it, and then I will leave it there and thank you for the evening and turn off the recording. So I'm gonna mute myself. Just one message for the students on hope, if you can.
Okay, I'll start with, so Maria, I want to thank you for giving us, and I'm going to be selfish and say me, because you're near and dear to my heart since we found out how our paths crossed decades ago, but more importantly, your role at Fordham University, my alma mater, which I feel strongly about. And I know a lot of my ability to just move forward is due to my foundation at Fordham with the amazing professors in the African American Studies Department. Again, being a pre-med student and a bio major, why was I in the African American Studies Department? But those professors instilled things in me that I know my bio majors and my science background could not give me. And that helped shape me to be the type of provider I am today. But it's, just definitely so special for you to have this panel on your last year. It's a pivotal year, historically. And if I was to leave students with one message, from a healthcare perspective, it's healthcare is a right, not a privilege, which is Ryan's motto for so many. that privilege has always been there. And they automatically can just walk into a clinic and people instantly, even from the point of the front desk, can I help you? But have a disheveled person of color show up smelling bad, looking bad, security might be called. Or so there's all these preconceived notions, even from our own people of color. So to treat people the way you want to be treated, and especially I see it every day in healthcare, we don't know what that person has shown up with. It may have taken them days, weeks, and even months to even show up to go to the doctor. But initially to be faced with someone who's like, someone who moves out of the way, someone who calls a security guard because they think they're going to be disruptive. They could be, have a mental illness on top of it. So treating people the way you want to be treated in whatever you do. And of course, being in healthcare, I see the need for that element of humanitarian, just to treat people the way you want to be treated, no matter how they look, no matter what they show up with, because we don't know what led them to that point. So thank you. Y te amo mucho. Thank you.
You want to go, Shona? Oh, okay. I think for me, I would say, don't give up, because I look at this generation and I tell you, you guys are about it. Like, we talked about, confidence and accepting things that perhaps we should have. And I look at, even my parents and that generation and my generation, and we sort of settled and didn't demand our due. And when we look at the news and we look at all these young people who are taking matters into their own hands and really trying to create the change that they want, my message would be, don't give up hope, because you really are challenging the status quo. You're not willing to accept anything less than you deserve. And so that to me is hopeful. So I say, don't give up hope, because, for this generation, you are not willing to just, to settle and just take things as they come. You know that you deserve more and you want better for yourselves and for your family. And so continue to do that.
Oh, it's all too deep. I don't know if I can follow this stuff up. I think what comes to mind for me is that not everything's black and white, not everything's about this current climate in terms of being overdetermined by the racism and the things that we have going on. I truly believe that it's going to take a major coming together for us to overcome this. This is a multifaceted, multicultural effort. Everybody is included. And I would leave you with one of James Baldwin's quotes, which is, we got to be as clear-minded about human beings as possible, because we are still each other's only hope. That's what I got for you, Maria.
Thank you.
Okay, you got me there with James Baldwin. That's the man.
That guy.
So I thank you all for this wonderful panel. Thank you, Sharita, Nicole, and Annette for coming in. And Juan Carlos, thank you so much for moderating the panel and really bringing out other layers of engaging questions for the panel. I thank you, Crystal, Shadae, Marlene. This was amazing. And on this note, I will stop recording. Yes.